Hey yo, fresh off the spaceship, look ma, we made it. From being faded, always intoxicated, I achieved greatness. I spent a lot of time waiting, life felt like a vacation. Put this in rotation, we're celebrating, investing in our payments. I got a raise of financial wages, large change in bank statements. I vision land covered, cropped in acreage. See this happiness amongst pain and anguish. Money talks in different languages, watch who you hang with. There's meaning in colored handkerchiefs. Gang affiliates bang like neighborhood natives. Life alone is dangerous, I like where anger lives. He can't hide if the act is hyenas. Running amok high, stuck in a hiatus. Raise haters a must. My rage is food for those who betrayed what was. A scavenger picking lavender for his crush. My boo's always okay with the bouquet sent by love. I want nothing biased, next to standing by us. So what? I got a problem with trust. That's money on the hush. ATM looking like a slot machine at Gold Rush. Levels of the upper echelon acting nonchalant. I left with the con, a leprechaun and no luck. The planet I'm from they call I don't give a fuck. Survival's gotten in blood, civilians are breadcrumbs, and everyone's going dumb. Children's are runaway bums, parents are ODing off drugs. There's no one to protect the slum. Just wait till they invade, they'll all come in a bunch. I shoot a sound wave that will silence them all at once. Brrrr. Brrrr. Homages, hidden gems. Bruce Lee.
Many people still today are focusing on the wrong thing.
Yes, the Latin Mass, or they're trying to whitewash Vatican II. They're trying to eke out a Catholic existence within the Novus Ordo. That is a big waste of time, and furthermore, it is contrary to faith. That is, either Vatican II and its changes are the Catholic faith, or they are not. There's no gray area between those two things. You can't be a little Catholic or somewhat Catholic. It either is the Catholic faith or it isn't. If it is not, it must be rejected with the same fervor that all of the martyrs of the early church and all of the martyrs of the Reformation rejected the new religion, and they went to their deaths for it. So either it's one or the other, because you can't be in between on this subject. And I think that has become very clear with the excommunication of Archbishop Vigano.
Many people still today.
The whole question of Vatican II is continuity. Is this continuity with the past or not? If it is, then the whole traditional movement should shut down, and we should all become Novus Ordites. If it is not continuity, then the Novus Ordo is bogus. It is bogus Catholicism. It is false. In other words, either it is the same religion as was before, or it is not. And that's what we have to look at. You know, some traditionalists say, well, you know, this Bergoglio is a heretic or this or that. You know, they focus on him. He's only a part of this. This whole thing has to do with Vatican II. Did Vatican II make a break with what was? If it did, it is as false and as phony, as the old saying says, as a $3 bill. The whole question, we do not say that Bergoglio or the Vatican II popes in general are not popes for the reason of their personal sin of heresy or even a crime of heresy. We say that they are not popes because they intend and have intended to impose upon the church a false religion, the Vatican II religion, which has its own rites, its own doctrines, its own disciplines, which are contrary to all of the traditional rites, doctrines, and disciplines of the Catholic Church. So that is what we call defect of intention, when after election he says, I accept. He accepts with the wrong intention, this evil intention of destroying ultimately the Catholic Church from within. That is the argument of the...
Is this not the opening barrage on the Novus Ordo, and he said that the horrible council should be crushed?
Well, I've said over and over again that Vatican II must be annulled. It is a council that taught heresy. It has all of the hallmarks of being false and of not having the assistance of the Holy Ghost. And it just has to go. And Archbishop Vigano called it a cancer. And what do you do with cancer? You cut it out. is you get rid of it. We have to do that. The church cannot have that in its midst. It's got to go. So yes, I agree with that.
Is this not the opening?
They must have amnesia.
I also think people have a
Guys, I'm finally talking about it. We're talking about Vatican II. This was one of the most significant events that took place in the Catholic Church. This historic conference brought together thousands
Hello, Internets. I'm
In just 4 minutes, we're going to outline why the Second
What if we told you you can find an incredible therapist who easily fits with your busy life?
Vatican Council was called, who was there, what they decided, and in just 4 minutes, we're going to outline why the Second Vatican Council was called, who was there, what they decided, and how it changed the church. So we better get cracking. Ecumenical councils, or meetings of all of the bishops, are super rare. On average, they happen once every 100 years. They're always called as a response to a crisis or a question. So what was the big deal facing the church in 1959 when John the 23rd decided to call a council? In a word, modernism. The world was rapidly changing after World War II in terms of science and culture and ideas about what it means to be human. How was the church going to relate to this new world? The church wasn't in decline, in fact it was booming, but John the 23rd expressed a desire to open the windows and let in some fresh air in terms of new ideas and energy. How would the church remain relevant and dynamic in this changing world? There were some new theological ideas that needed to be addressed as well, but they're a bit too technical for this video. So, who was there? 2 popes led Vatican II because, well, John the 23rd died in 1963, 1 year in. Paul VI took it to conclusion. They were joined by around 2,000 bishops and leaders of major Catholic orders. These guys made the big decisions. They were assisted by a bunch of theological experts, mainly priests. Alongside all these guys, a number of lay people, including 20 women, were brought in as auditors and advisors. Finally, non-Catholic Christians were invited to observe, including Orthodox and Protestant Christians. So, what did they decide? I'm only going to give a few highlights here because, well, they came up with an awful lot in 3 years. Firstly, they didn't change any beliefs of the church, they just changed how some of these beliefs were expressed. The first, they highlighted the universal call to holiness. This means everyone, of every rank, is responsible for being and building the church. It was an emphasis on ordinary Catholics rather than on just priests and bishops. Second, the church should seek greater unity with all Christians and seek peace with other religions. Third, the church should seek to be involved in the modern world through advances such as communications technology. Fourth, the church's nature was re-evaluated. It must be a light to the world, bringing the truth of Christ to all. Fifth, scripture was emphasised as important. In particular, all Catholics, lay and religious, were encouraged to read the scripture for themselves. That said, Vatican II emphasised that tradition was also important. Finally, the Mass was emphasised as being super important, with a focus on lay participation, that's ordinary Catholics. So, how did it change the Church? The most visible changes for ordinary Catholics were found in the Mass. For example, most priests now face the people when celebrating Mass, emphasising the role of the lay people. Priests were permitted to say the Mass in the local language rather than in Latin. Latin is still the official language of the Church and the liturgy though. There are more scripture readings and these are read by lay people. And lay people were tasked with preparing and leading prayers in the prayers of the faithful and in assisting at communion. All of these changes were designed to more fully involve ordinary Catholics in the Mass. Other changes included a softening of language when talking about non-Catholics and a more welcoming attitude towards cooperating with other Christian groups. The Church adopted a clearer anti-war stance as a result of the catastrophe of World War II. And finally, Vatican II has also started a whole bunch of arguments, as will no doubt be seen in the comments section below this video. There are those who say we should pursue the spirit of the Council, meaning we should be more open to the world and less concerned with tradition. In contrast, there are those who say we should accept the literal decisions of the Council, but that tradition is important and should be preserved. So, hopefully you now know why the Council was called, who was there, what they decided, and how it changed the Church.
The Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, was perhaps the most important and influential event in the history of, at the very least, the modern Catholic Church. It was the 21st Ecumenical Council recognized by the Church, spanning 4 years from 1962 to 1965, and with representatives from every continent. Convoked by Pope John XXIII, Vatican II aimed to finally complete the work started by the First Vatican Council that began almost a century prior in 1869, but which was rudely interrupted by the capture of Rome and establishment of the Kingdom of Italy. Vatican II was monumental in its undertaking, and it covered topics ranging from massive liturgical reforms and a renewal of numerous fundamental church teachings, all the way to a more progressive perspective on interfaith relations, the role of the clergy, and, most importantly for the topic of this video, the language and ritual of Mass. The Council decided to stray from the long-standing tradition of the Church in the use of Latin during the liturgy, and instead permitted the use of local languages. The use of vernacular languages was compounded by the simplification of Mass, the greater responsibilities granted to the laity, as well as what seemed to more traditionalist Catholics, the Church bowing down to modern social pressures, and thus softening its position on numerous issues. In short, the traditionalist Catholics saw the Council as the Church diverging from its traditions, especially regarding the liturgy, but also in its dogmatic positions. As getting further into the details of Vatican II would take a much longer video, the base of the matter is this. Vatican II was unprecedented in its scale and covered topics inherently connected with an ever-modernizing world. This modernization was naturally opposed, and especially in its early implementation, Vatican II was shunned by countless Catholics deemed traditionalist. Here is where J.R.R. Tolkien finally comes into the picture. As most people know, Tolkien was an incredibly devout Catholic, whose faith and church were perhaps the most important things in his life, at least as an individual. It was his salvation, his connection to his mother who died so young, and for him, the Catholic Church was, in fact, the one founded by Christ himself, and which was passed down by the apostles, uncorrupted, onto the present day. It doesn't matter whether I or you believe this to be the case, what matters is that Tolkien did. Tolkien, however, was not only a Catholic, but a very traditionalist one at that. He was learned in the history of the Church and of its fathers, in their treatises and their councils, and adored the mystery and the spirituality of its traditions, which were naturally conveyed through its ancient and sacred tongue, Latin. As he revealed in his letters, the Blessed Sacrament, the Eucharist, was his salvation on a very literal level when life got difficult, as it usually did. As a linguist especially, Latin and its use in church were incredibly important to the professor and his spiritual life, and it was directly connected to the sacraments that he adored so deeply, and in which he would find solace in his darkest hour. And so, a notable example of his opposition to the reforms of Vatican II comes from the account of Tolkien's grandson, Simon, which stated, "I vividly remember going to church with him in Bournemouth. He was a devout Roman Catholic, and it was soon after the church had changed the liturgy from Latin to English. My grandfather obviously didn't agree with this, and made all the responses very loudly in Latin, while the rest of the congregation answered in English. I found the whole experience quite excruciating, but my grandfather was oblivious. He simply had to do what he believed to be right." For Tolkien, the matter of Latin as the language of worship was simultaneously the tip of the iceberg as well as its foundation. This is because he recognized that, while all things considered, the linguistic was not a matter of top priority when it came to the spiritual, it also signified something infinitely more important: the altering of the church, the ever-increasing simplification of its ways, and the abandonment of its sacred traditions, with the language of Mass being, naturally, the easiest example for anyone to see, and especially for a linguist. And so, while Tolkien hated the change of the liturgy and certainly adhered to the pre-Vatican II ways of the Church, his main and most important concern was the Catholic Church becoming like the Protestant churches that he was so familiar with as an English Catholic, and a Catholic convert no less. In letter 306, written to his son Michael 2 years following the Vatican Council in 1967, Tolkien argues that the Protestants search backwards for simplicity and directness, which of course, though it contains some good, or at least intelligible motives, is mistaken and indeed vain. Because primitive Christianity is now, and in spite of all research will ever remain, largely unknown, because primitiveness is no guarantee of value, and is, and was in great, a reflection of ignorance. Grave abuses were as much an element in Christian liturgical behavior from the beginning as now. Still more because my church was not intended by our Lord to be static or remain in perpetual childhood, but to be a living organism, likened to a plant, which develops and changes in externals by the interaction of its bequeathed divine life and history, the particular circumstances of the world into which it is set. There is no resemblance between the mustard seed and the full-grown tree. For those living in the days of its branching growth, the tree is the thing, for the history of a living thing is part of its life, and the history of a divine thing is sacred. The wise may know that it began with a seed, but it is vain to try and dig it up, for it no longer exists, and the virtue and powers that it had now reside in the tree. Very good, but in husbandry, the authorities, the keepers of the tree, must look after it, according to such wisdom as they possess, prune it, remove cankers, rid it of parasites, and so forth. But they will certainly do harm if they are obsessed with the desire of going back to the seed, or even to the first youth when it was, as they imagine, pretty and unafflicted by evils. The other motive, now so confused with the primitivist one, even in the mind with any one of the reformers, aggiornamento, bringing up to date. That has its own grave dangers, as has been apparent throughout history. With this, ecumenicalness has also become confused. In this letter, Tolkien recognizes and adheres to the long-lasting Catholic belief, often in opposition to the Eastern Orthodox position, that the Church must change, and continuously does so as guided by the Holy Spirit. Therefore, Tolkien does not oppose reform or new dogmas, simply seeing them as either a divinely ordained evolution or perhaps even discovery of new truth. Instead, his problem is, as he mentions, the bringing up to date for the sake of bringing up to date. Aggiornamento was famously used during the Vatican II Council and was even more famously attributed to Pope John XXIII himself, and it consisted of the modernization of the Church. Tolkien was opposed to modernization in the sense that the Church had to adhere to an external social pressure, which is what he saw as modernization being in the first place. That is why Latin was left behind, why the liturgy was simplified, and why post-Vatican II services can seem so distant from tradition, with some more traditionalist individuals even making Protestant comparisons. And so, Tolkien to his core, with his beliefs and upbringing, had an incredibly difficult time accepting the changes brought on by the Council. He disagreed with many of the decisions made there, but he nonetheless had to respect them. As a Catholic, he believed in the authority vested in the Pope, and the importance of the Bishop of Rome to the Catholic Church, which, according to Tolkien, was the church founded by Christ himself, and the sole instrument of salvation. But how can I disagree with something that I must believe to be right, if I am to fulfill my most important identity as a Catholic Christian, is what the professor must have thought. In truth, and in his humility, he did not truly know. What he knew were the values closest to his heart, in which he felt that, despite of everything, the Catholic Church was the way, regardless of the disagreements he felt as an intellectual. On that note, in the same letter, Tolkien says that, "I know quite well that, to you as to me, the Church which once felt like a refuge now often feels like a trap. There is nowhere else to go. I wonder if this desperate feeling, the last state of loyalty hanging on, was not, even more often than is actually recorded in the Gospels, felt by our Lord's followers in his earthly lifetime. I think there is nothing to do but to pray for the Church, for the Vicar of Christ, and for ourselves, and meanwhile to exercise the virtue of loyalty, which indeed only becomes a virtue when one is under pressure to desert it." He disagreed with most of what was happening to the church and was even emotionally distressed. And yet, he had to hold on to his faith and believe that the Catholic Church would endure and that it was the way forward, even if he himself did not know how. Despite his concerns, in letter 306, he also commended Vatican II's cooperative sentiment with other Christian groups and its spirit of ecumenicalism, with Tolkien always holding out hope and wishing for the reunion of all Christians under the Catholic Church. In fact, in the letter, he was specific in his wording by stating that, "I find myself in sympathy with those developments that are strictly ecumenical," which could be interpreted as saying that he naturally opposed the other developments within the church and what he himself called the church's trends. While this is an incredibly difficult topic, and I myself am not Catholic, I hope I painted a clearer picture on Tolkien's beliefs regarding one of his faiths.
Vatican II ruined everything. Here's why. Before I begin my rant about how the Second Vatican Council ruined everything, please allow me to clarify what I am not doing. I am not making a nuanced and heavily cited theological critique about this thing or that thing that can be found in the documents. Also, I am not wading into the debate as to whether one can stand on his head after spinning in circles and use a thesaurus to come to the conclusion that a particular phrase could be seen as orthodox as long as there is a full moon. Frankly, Vatican II proponents have been doing this for 50 years, and they can continue doing so if they wish until the point where basically no one finds what they say relevant. Even if it was possible to squint and find orthodoxy in the documents in a technical sense, that does not mean the documents aren't conducive to error or harm. For example, if I was to say, "It cannot be said that I am not saying something that should be said about a time that was in a particular moment a relevant era for the progression of that which is dynamic and motivating, about the arc of the historical reality of the moment in which the Church has come to find her true identity in the faith that beats in the heart of the faithful," then I would have said nothing technically wrong, but I would have said basically nothing at all. And I would have said something that would confuse believers and adherents to what I wrote. And it would be easy for a modernist to cite my words improperly. And I would at least indirectly be the cause of scandal, ambiguity, and confusion. Furthermore, I am not saying that everything was hunky-dory before the council. It was not. Of course it was not. Otherwise, St. Pius X would not have needed to give us his scathing rebuke of modernism, which by that point was at least decades old. Now, what am I doing? First, I should define what I mean by Vatican II. I believe it was a valid ecumenical council, and I also believe what the two popes who oversaw it said about it, in that it was not definitively dogmatic in all cases and that it was pastoral. What does that mean? I have no idea, and I don't think anyone really does, which is one of the reasons things have been such a disaster. Second, I will not separate the quote-unquote spirit of Vatican II from the letter of Vatican II. That is what Pharisees do. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like to whited sepulchres, which outwardly appear to men beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones, and of filthiness. Matthew chapter 23, verse 27. Even if the letter is good, but the spirit is rotten, then I want nothing to do with it. For the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. And by Vatican II, I am ultimately referring to that paradigm that followed the council, which I believe is fair. For example, although the Novus Ordo is not technically the liturgy found in the documents of the council, it is the conciliar liturgy, which is to say the liturgy that came from the amorphous time in history that we call the Vatican II paradigm. We are living in a paradigm of awful liturgy, bad theology, corrupt morality, dubious ecclesiology, and utter confusion, and it was all given a stamp of approval in the Church at some point in history, starting in the 1960s, at Vatican II. Now that the primer is out of the way, the following are, in my opinion, the two main problems whereby Vatican II has directly or indirectly ruined everything: the liturgy and the absence of anything truly pastoral. Some will retort and say that the new Mass was not the Mass of Vatican II. Yes, technically the Novus Ordo is not found in the documents, but the new Mass was created in response to the call to reform the liturgy, which emanated from the liturgical writings in the Council, and the Pope of the Council promulgated the Mass in the immediate aftermath of Vatican II. Do the math. While it is true that liturgical reform is nothing new, it is also true that the manifest intention behind the implementation of the Novus Ordo was to imbibe a Protestant spirit in the faithful, Don't believe me? Think I am some rad trad who is a malcontent about most things modern? Well, I am a bit of a malcontent at times, but notwithstanding my being such a way, I am not making it up. The original document that instructed the Church on the raison d'être behind the new Mass, the 1969 Institutio Generalis Missalis Romani, the original general instruction of the Roman Missal, stated the following in paragraph 7. The Lord's Supper, or Mass, is the sacred meeting or congregation of the people of God assembled, the priest presiding, to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. For this reason, Christ's promise applies eminently to such a local gathering of Holy Church. Where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I in their midst. Matthew chapter 18, verse 20. It does not say the Lord's Supper or Mass is representative of the sacred meeting, or something to that effect. It is plain as day and says the Mass is a meeting or congregation of the people of God. I will take things that are heretical and belong to Luther's diabolical heresy for 200, Alex. Now, that definitional statement about the very nature of the Mass was swiftly changed, but it did no good and was revealing. It did no good because the proverbial cat was out of the bag, and it was a Protestant cat who looked to a faux consubstantial Eucharist. It did no good because, as Paul VI said on Holy Thursday 1969, a practically schismatic ferment divides, subdivides, splits the church. It does not matter that the general instruction was changed, because the general instruction showed what the reformers, revolutionaries, wanted to imbibe in the faithful. Who would have thought a liturgy drawn up, partly on a napkin, by a man who was almost certainly a Freemason, with the help of a half-dozen Protestant ministers, could have been done with the intent to imbibe religious indifferentism and Protestant theology in the faithful? I know, what a stretch. There is a story wherein St. Philip Neri taught a woman the danger of gossip by asking her to buy him a chicken in the market, and while walking, pluck it en route to deliver it to him. When she arrived, he told her to go and get the feathers and bring them to him, which she knew was impossible. She finally understood the dangers of something quote-unquote getting out there, as it is impossible for it all to be retrieved and cleaned up. The Protestant theology was baked into the cake, and the ideas of the revolutionaries were out there for all to see, and no amount of revisions would be able to gather up those heretical feathers. Considering the fact that the vast majority of Catholics get their religion from Sunday Mass, it is not a stretch at all, to suggest that the Vatican II inspired recovation of the Mass did great harm to the Church and the souls who left, or were subsequently malformed due to the lex orandi flowing from the Protestant-imbibed, Freemasonically constructed liturgy that was shoved down their throats. Nothing pastoral at all. We have been told that Vatican II was pastoral enough times that we are probably sick of hearing it. If we have issues with its orthodoxy, then we needn't worry because it was pastoral. If we don't understand why the catechisms were obliterated or the Mass was destroyed, or a zillion Catholics left the Church, don't worry, it was pastoral. But the fact is, Vatican II was anything but pastoral. As a pastor is a shepherd, and a shepherd is only a good shepherd, which is to say a shepherd at all, as a bad shepherd is not what he claims to be, if he leads and protects the sheep. A pastor cannot shepherd his sheep if his sheep are confused about what sheep should do or what pastors believe. A flock cannot be shepherded by a pastor if the pastor refuses to define the boundaries of the pasture or to definitively tell the sheep not to dine with the wolves. And wayward sheep will not stay in the fold if the shepherd uses his crook to beat down the traditional sheep, who present themselves as obstacles to ecumenical gatherings with the fox and the coyote. You would not say, if you saw a shepherd directing his flock off a cliff, "Don't worry, he is just shepherding them." Or, imagine you saw the shepherd relieving his sheepdogs of their duty and then leave his sheep outside where the wolves like to roam. We certainly would not say that this pastor was being pastoral. If anything, we would say he was being an idiot and has lost the moral authority to shepherd the flock he has abandoned to slaughter. Although it is technically true that the popes have said that Vatican II was pastoral in a technical sense, it is definitely not the case that the Vatican Council contributed to the pastoring of the Church. The proponents of the Council like to say that the Council simply opened up the windows to let the Church out, as if she was artificially enclosed in a prison of her own making, but are often baffled by the fact that all we have seen is the smoke of Satan wafting into the sanctuary after the pastors defenestrated themselves in droves. Some council-splainers will console each other and opine that although a reasonable person may be of the theological opinion that the council was implemented imprudently, they will question the idea that the council or its mass may truly have forced the sheep to leave the flock, as, after all, Everyone who left or became a heretic did so on their own accord and by their own free will. Perhaps they should have just read a different interpretation of Lumen Gentium. I have also heard that there are parents who send their Catholic children to state schools and then are confused when they put their pronouns in their bio and refuse to have a hair color not found in the rainbow. If people want to prattle on about the real Vatican II or the Reverent Novus Ordo, which can only be reverent in aesthetic but not immune from the Protestant spirit branded onto the thing, then so be it. But I will end with a quote from C.S. Lewis, who ironically is likely more Catholic in spirit as an Anglican than the spirit of Vatican II. Quote, "We all want progress, but progress means getting nearer to the place where you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turn, then to go forward does not get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road, and in that case the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. There is nothing progressive about being pig-headed and refusing to admit a mistake. And I think if you look at the present state of the world, it's pretty plain that humanity has been making some big mistakes. We're on the wrong road, and if it is so, we must go back. Going back is the quickest way on." Hear, hear, Lewis. Switch the word humanity for church, and we have got a prophecy on our hands.
The Pope unveiled a Palestinian nativity scene gifted to the Vatican, featuring a representation of baby Jesus in a kfir, the traditional Palestinian national scarf draped on Jesus's cradle. The pontiff called on believers to remember the brothers and sisters who in Bethlehem and other parts of the world are suffering from the tragedy of war.
The Holy Father has announced which holy doors will be open for pilgrims, and they're not all in churches.
We begin in Rome, where they are bracing for a slew of visitors. In less than 2 weeks, millions of people will flock to the Italian capital for the Jubilee. A Jubilee year is a Catholic tradition that takes place every 25 years, and one that began more than 700 years ago. The 2025 Jubilee officially starts on December 24th of this year, when the Pope opens the Holy Door of St. Peter's Basilica.
After 5 years of restoration, Archbishop of Paris Laurent Ulrich knocked on the doors of Notre Dame. Inside, the 8,000 pipe organ filled the cathedral and a choir sang out in joy. The restored cathedral gleamed with clean stone, repainted structures, and vibrant stained glass windows. Attendees included the United Kingdom's Prince William, US First Lady Jill Biden, Ukrainian President Zelensky, and President-elect Donald Trump, standing alongside French President Macron. Notably absent was Pope Francis, who chose to decline the invitation.
Stay with us, because right now we go to the Vatican. Pope Francis will meet Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas on Thursday, as the Catholic pontiff becomes more vocal in his criticism of Israel's retaliatory military operation in Gaza following the October 7th Hamas invasion and mass abduction. Abbas travels to Italy this week, where he is set to meet with President Sergio Mattarella and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. And very briefly, much reaction, of course, to the Pope unveiling that Palestinian nativity scene, so to speak, gifted to the Vatican. Tell us very briefly some of the varied reactions so far.
A seasonal nativity scene at the Vatican has been removed after backlash over its depiction of baby Jesus lying on a keffiyeh, the traditional scarf used by Palestinians as a national symbol, according to reports. The keffiyeh-draped cradle, which was displayed in the Paul VI Hall, was one of a series of nativity scenes collectively titled Nativity of Bethlehem 2024, designed by 2 Palestinian artists.
The Holy Father has announced which holy doors will be open for pilgrims, and they're not all in churches. EWTN Vatican journalist Benedict Sidegren has more.
An estimated 35 million pilgrims are expected to gather in Rome for the 2025 Jubilee. For many attendees, this holy year is an opportunity to deepen their union with Christ and strengthen their faith.
There's really a spiritual significance for the pilgrim to come over here and, of course, to cross the most famous holy door that it's open for this specific and historical event. In fact, every 25 years.
The Jubilee will begin with the opening of the Holy Door of St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Eve 2024.
the Vatican today, Pope Francis is installing 21 new cardinals. Many of the new leaders are key figures in the Pope's reform agenda, which includes a crackdown on abuse. Francis is also broadening the geographic diversity of the College of Cardinals with appointments of 2 new cardinals from Asia, 2 from Africa, and 5 from Latin America.
Also included on the list is the Archbishop Dominique Mathieu of Tehran Isfahan, a Belgian Franciscan missionary based in Iran. This appointment is likely part of Pope Francis's desire to promote dialogue with Islam and peace in the Middle East.
Archbishop Rino Fisichella emphasized how the Jubilee stands as a testament to the enduring power of hope. Quoting Pope Francis, he said, "May this year of grace contribute greatly to restoring a climate of hope and trust as a prelude to the renewal and rebirth that we so urgently desire."
Just seen a moment ago Felix Tshisekedi, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So let's look at on a wider perspective here. I'm going to start with Seema Gupta, our correspondent in Rome. This is a huge moment, Seema, tonight in the Catholic calendar, and yet the Pope isn't there, declining an invitation. Tell us about the dynamic there, Seema.
Yes, I mean, there have been some reports that some French bishops perhaps annoyed that he's not there in Paris this evening, that the French establishment not happy that he declined this invitation to come. Could it be perhaps that he was angered by French policies with regards to immigration, the plight of migrants being something very close to the heart of the pontiff, or perhaps not happy with the decision to make the right to abortion part of the French constitution? But perhaps it could simply be because of a scheduling conflict. I mean, today, here in Rome, this evening, this afternoon, Pope Francis presided over a consistory to put in place 21 new cardinals. So this was a busy part of the year for the Pope in the lead up to Christmas and the lead up to the Jubilee Catholic year in 2025. And on Sunday, he will also be having the annual commemoration of a feast day to the Virgin Mary, something that happens every year on the 8th of December. That is an important ceremony here in Rome for Pope Francis. So he simply couldn't make it for this weekend. Also, perhaps the Pope really likes to stress more on the communities, Catholic communities in the peripheries, and not so much something happening maybe perhaps in a major European capital, because it's interesting to note, while he's not there in Paris this weekend, he will next weekend be making a trip to the French Mediterranean island of Corsica to attend a Catholic conference, and President Macron is scheduled to meet him there. So perhaps once again, his stress on Catholic communities in the peripheries rather than perhaps a grand cathedral opening in Paris.
The act symbolizes the offering of an extraordinary path towards salvation and invites Christians to make the passage from sin to grace. Pilgrims who make the journey to walk through a holy door can receive a plenary indulgence under the usual conditions. In preparation for the Jubilee, the Holy Father called for 2024 to be a year of prayer. Outside the Vatican, the city of Rome is undergoing a transformation. One noticeable change: the Piazza Pia will be a more pedestrian-friendly area connecting Castel Sant'Angelo to St. Peter's Square.
As staff, we are really excited to welcome and assist everyone, and welcome especially everyone beside us, the pilgrims, and to let them discover the historical part of the city of Rome, maybe also the religious part, which the Vatican also represents as a country, and the Catholic Church.
The theme for the upcoming year is Pilgrims of Hope. As Pope Francis stressed in the papal document announcing the upcoming Jubilee, we must become singers of hope in a world marked by too much despair.
The goal of this Jubilee year is to remind Catholics and the Church to reflect the mercy and compassion of God. Within the hour, Milwaukee Archbishop Jerome Listecki blessed and opened the holy doors at the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. Jubilee years in the Church are generally celebrated every 25 to 50 years.
As the 2025 Jubilee is approaching, Pope Francis includes an invitation to be pilgrims of hope and recalls that hope must be the anchor and the sail that guide us toward a more fraternal future.
The newly created cardinals hail from regions like Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, and South America. During his homily, the pontiff called on the new cardinals to be witnesses of fraternity, emphasizing their roles as close advisors in a time of global conflict and division. The group includes the youngest cardinal, the 44-year-old Ukrainian Bishop Mykola Baichok, and the oldest Italian Archbishop Angelo Acerbi, who is 99 years old. Acerbi delivered a message on behalf of the new cardinals, reflecting on global conflicts that continue to disfigure the human family. Pope Francis has now appointed approximately 80% of the cardinals who will vote for the next pope, cementing his influence on the church's future.
You start with the heart. I saw y'all praying.
Yeah. Where was the Council of Jerusalem held? Jerusalem? Oh, great. Tell me something about the Second Vatican Council.
Not really. Not so much.
Can you name the most recent ecumenical council? Okay. Did Vatican II condemn communists, Buddhists, Protestants, or none of the above? Oh. Who was Benedict XVI's predecessor?
I have no idea. Benedict XV. It's a good guess.
There were about 500 bishops around the world, including Asia and Africa, who participated in the Second Vatican Council.
True.
Do you think Pope Benedict XVI is a cat person or a dog person? No. What was the Mass like before Vatican II? Name at least one document of Vatican II. Vatican II confirmed that truth can only be found in the Catholic Church. Name the Pope who convened the Second Vatican Council.
You mentioned the hijacking of the council. What was it like?
I graduated from high school in 1966,
Okay.
and already the turmoil was starting. The council had ended in 1965. Then I went to the Catholic University of America to study philosophy. Philosophy program there was outstanding, but the seminary was in complete turmoil. I lived through all of the liturgical abuses. When I read Summorum Pontificum, he said it was practically more than a person could stand. I had grown up with a wonderful catechesis, the Baltimore Catechism. We were instilled with a very deep understanding of our faith, but I saw that all evaporate in this kind of ridiculous emphasis on experience without any proper instruction. Then I saw so many priests who abandoned the active priestly ministry, so many religious sisters who abandoned their consecrated life, and it was simply a time of great turmoil.
You mentioned
with Bergoglio. He is incapable of saying anything pious. Said this goes back to Vatican II. Very important point. It all started with Vatican II. It started with the evil intention of John the 23rd, who was a modernist during his whole life, to transform the church into a modernist ecumenical church of no dogmas and simply humanitarianism, which is exactly what we have with Bergoglio. He is incapable of saying anything pious. All he talks about is climate change and wars and various other problems of humanity. And he's trying to make the world a better place to live in. See, that's the purpose of the Catholic Church. He said this goes back to Vatican. The problem is not that he is a personal heretic, even if there were no other problem about it. That is not the central problem of the Church. The central problem of the Church is that he and his Vatican II so-called Pope predecessors have been imposing upon us a false religion, and as he says, this is an attempt to overthrow the Church. This is this goes back to Vatican II, he says. This idea of transforming the Church, and that is the problem. The problem is not that he is a personal heretic, even if there were no other problem about it. That is not the central problem of the Church.
If it was in 1950, they had actually been doing preparations for a council, and Pope Pius XII ended up just didn't go through with that. Well, he dies in 1958, and then Roncalli is elected as Pope John the 23rd. Well, a lot of people don't know this, but when he was a priest, he was actually a professor of church history. So church history was a big part of his work. And in particular, he was a priest of the Diocese of Bergamo, which is near Milan. And so he would go to the Ambrosian Library in Milan and do research there. And he came across these several volumes, something like 39 or 40 volumes of text dealing with the implementation of the Council of Trent. And he particularly was influenced by the work of St. Charles Borromeo, who had been the Archbishop of Milan, and conducted an apostolic visitation to the Diocese of Bergamo. And there were like multiple volumes detailing how he implemented Trent in the Diocese of Bergamo.
Okay.
And as Father Roncalli, he was really enthusiastic about that. Like, he really appreciated the pastoral renewal that took place through Trent and its implementation by St. Charles Borromeo. He actually spent decades preparing to publish these works for a wider audience, and he was training seminarians to translate from the Latin and all of these things. And I don't remember how many volumes he published out of that, but it was over several decades. The last one to be published was in 1959. The last of those volumes. And that's the same year he announced he was calling an ecumenical council. So
he shut the book.
Basically, he wanted a renewal for the church because of his appreciation for what Trent did. And so he wanted another renewal of the church. So Trent was actually a big part of his inspiration for doing that. Also, again, Vatican I was never completed. So there were a lot of things it didn't cover that it was planning to cover. And you couple that with the fact, I mean, think about 1870 to 1959 or the start of the council in 1962. A lot of stuff happened in the world. You know, you had the communist revolutions. So you had the rise of the communism in China and in Russia. You had technological advancements like we'd never seen in the history of humankind. I mean, you think about the technology from 1870 to 1962. I mean, airplanes, automobiles, even the typewriter was like fairly new during Vatican I. Like, no one had one.
Wow.
You know, telephones, television, radio.
Yeah.
The world had just changed. Travel. I mean, the mixing of cultures like that took place during that time period. You had the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War. Vietnam was going on, right? You basically no longer had any confessional states, meaning, you know, Catholic countries that were explicitly Catholic. So Christendom is pretty much over. You've got these huge cultural movements going on. And so
this is so helpful.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to look back with historical ignorance and wonder why it was even called in the first place, and to, as you say, these people are overly critical sometimes of the Second Vatican Council, and this is really helpful to realize why the Church decided that something had to be done, said, some kind of renewal had to take place.
Right.
Can you keep talking about this sort of stuff? Because this is really fascinating.
Yeah, you know, I think, and now I'm not a historian, but I would be hard pressed to think of another time frame of 90 years or so.
Yeah, with seismic,
where that much change happened to humanity at the same time.
Yeah.
And especially when you think about Europe, which traditionally was Catholic, right? I mean, France was the eldest daughter of the church. It became very anti-clerical to the point where, like, you couldn't even teach, like, people had to go study in other Catholic universities outside of France. There was that much animosity towards the church. After the two world wars, I mean, there was a lot of dismay and despair. You know, that's why you think of, like, German philosophers and how dark they are, right? There was a lot of concerns there. The scientific advancements happening, you know, those sorts of revolutions. So politically, culturally, technologically, you know, the way people thought, let's face it, I mean, even philosophy was sort of really struggling, right? I mean, you had these new thinkers coming up, and people weren't even really trained in, you know, classical philosophy anymore, or to the extent that they used to be. So it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on. We probably should address it. Let's try to explain some basic Catholic beliefs in a way that people can understand it. And so the Second Vatican Council, largely, he wanted it to be renewal within the church. So he wanted the church to be revived from within. He wanted to try to help reunite Christians together. And he wanted it to be missionary.
Okay.
So it's like, how can we spread the message of the gospel to the world?
And when you say renewal, what does that mean?
It's always one of those questions, I think. But I think sometimes we have this picture that the Catholic Church was great in the 1950s and early 60s, and then Vatican II ruined everything.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Okay.
And if you talk to people from that time period, they'll tell you that. But think about, just as one example, you know, then Ratzinger, long before he became Pope Benedict XVI, right? He wrote an article in the late 1950s, and it depends how you translate it, but it's either like the new pagans or the new heathens in the church. And he basically said, we have a facade. Like, people are culturally Catholic. We've got the buildings. They're having the baptism and the first communion parties, but they're pagans. These people coming to church don't really believe.
When did he write that?
It was like I'm not positive. It was like 1958, 59, something like that. 57. I don't know. It was
before the renewals in the liturgy.
Oh, yeah. It was well before Vatican II. I mean, it was at least 4 or 5 years before Vatican II, I think. And he's basically saying, look, this is a facade, and it's going to come crashing down.
There's that German pessimism again.
You know, and because he basically was saying, look, like, we're passing out the sacraments of initiation like candy. And I'm highly paraphrasing here. But that's basically what he's saying, is we're baptizing babies to parents that haven't darkened the door of a church in years. Like, or, you know, people are going to mass, but they're not living the faith. They don't really believe. It's like you do these things because it's the cultural thing to do.
Okay.
You know, and
so you could say that the renewal, I guess renewal always means this in a way, but it's so that Catholics can know what they believe, why they believe it, and be inflamed with love for Christ and the mission of the church, right? I suppose.
Right. And for other people to know, take advantage of the development of mass media. Like, let's get people to know, what we actually hold.
St. Ignatius sent Francis Xavier on mission. He famously told him, "Ite inflammate omnia." Go set the world on fire. It's the kind of thing you hear this time of year at graduation ceremonies. But it's all too easy for our cares and concerns to extinguish the flame. Hi, I'm Father Michael Rossman, and this is my 1-minute homily. I was excited to see a statue of St. Francis Xavier at the Jesuit headquarters in Rome with those famous words, only to find a fire extinguisher just behind it. What a perfect image. We have great ideals, go set the world on fire, but so frequently our own stuff can get in the way. Today the Church celebrates Pentecost and the awesome gift of the Holy Spirit. If we forget about the Holy Spirit and make our own plans for making the world better, we'll be disappointed. But if we first watch what God is doing in us and around us and cooperate with the Holy Spirit, well then, we will set the world on fire. Ite inflammate omnia, by allowing the Holy Spirit to take the lead and going along for the ride.
In 1534, Ignatius of Loyola founds the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, to counter the Protestant Reformation. Originally a soldier, a battle injury leads Ignatius to spiritual conversion. During his recovery, he writes Spiritual Exercises, a key text for Jesuit formation. With papal approval in 1540, the Jesuits quickly excel in education and missionary work, becoming instrumental in the Counter-Reformation. Known for adaptability, they spread from Europe to Asia and the Americas. Their impact endures despite periodic suppression and suspicion. Subscribe for more stories of theology and history. In 1534, Ignatius
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish.
Gaudium Magnum, habemus Papam. Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum Georgium Marium, Sancte Romani Ecclesiae Cardinalem Bergoglio, qui sibi nomen imposuit Franciscum.
Reaction in Argentina to the election of one of their own as Pope has sparked a divergence of opinion. While mainly positive, among some it's revived a polemic about the role of the Roman Catholic Church during the country's so-called Dirty War. But the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo are more critical of the former cardinal. They're campaigning for justice for their children who disappeared during the military dictatorship in the 70s and early 80s. The church in Argentina was giving communion to the assassins, and the assassins should repent. Ours didn't repent, not even during their trials. He was nominated bishop at the time, and as a bishop he could have done more.
Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, 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 Argentina.
A German U-boat pulls into a foreign port, not in Japan or Spain, but in the South American nation of Argentina. Argentina's Juan Perón is an open admirer of Hitler's regime, and the country is already home to many powerful Nazis. In the coming years, many more will arrive, including the wanted war criminals Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the death camps, and Joseph Mengele, dubbed Auschwitz's Doctor of Death.
Argentina tenía el dudoso privilegio de albergar el partido nazi más importante del mundo fuera de Alemania.
In Argentina, all the conditions were right to accept Nazi war criminals.
Perón muy hábilmente consideraba que era un deshonor llevar a juicio a un ejército derrotado.
En el caso de Mengele, Laboratorio Fabro-Farm lo incorporó como parte de su plantel.
Que lo encontró un equipo de la televisión de Estados Unidos.
En el caso de Eichmann, los israelíes no iban a actuar por derecha y decidieron el secuestro directamente.
¿Qué mejor que un país hospitalario?
ביצע הוצאות להורג, גירש למחנות ריכוז, שם נרצחו.
60 years, this is how long it took Nazi hunters to track down Ivo Roinica, a Croatian officer, another who said he was just following orders as he oversaw the cleansing of Jews and Serbs in Croatia.
Se lo acusa de haber provocado incitación a matanza.
Despite his denial, these documents show exactly what the 91-year-old man ordered done back in 1941 in Dubrovnik, Croatia, as a senior officer in the Ostashi, a fascist organization subordinated to the Nazis.
Se prohíbe a todos los judíos y serbios libre movimiento por las calles.
This officer was on a mission of the SS, didn't only restrict the people's movement.
Mentirle a la gente Serbia y judía de que los va a ayudar a trasladarse a Italia. Y entonces con ese cuento los metía en un barco sin saber qué pasó con ellos.
A wave of Nazi criminals washed South America after the war. Some of the fugitive killers arrived with the shelter of dictator Juan Perón to Argentina to the Bariloche village. Others, like Ornitza, preferred Buenos Aires. The Croatian criminal may be feared of revenge, but didn't really went out of its way to hide. He built a classic European house just 300 meters away from the president's house. But Roinita is wrong. The score isn't settled. After numerous setbacks, the hunters in the Byzantine center, who have watched him all these years, believe Serbia will submit under pressure and demand his extradition. Now, the man in charge of cleansing Dubrovnik will finally face charges, and will find out that the stain in his past cannot be erased.
In 2016. Some people say that obviously you're very proud of your family and proud of their accomplishments, but the question is, would it be a political burden? I think it's fair to say that when your brother left the presidency, he was somewhat unpopular. Do you think that there is any Bush baggage? Do you think that would be a problem?
No, I don't think there's any Bush baggage at all. I am proud to be a Bush, and if I run for president, it's not because of something in my DNA that compels me to do it. It would be that it's the right thing to do for my family, that the conditions are right, and that I have something to offer. And that decision will happen, as I said, later on.
March the 24th, 1976, a military junta headed by General Videla overthrew Argentina's democratically elected government and launched a campaign of terror against all who opposed the coup.
De Dios, quisiera demostrar sobre esta tierra de cuánto es capaz el ejército argentino cuando lucha por la libertad, la paz y la justicia para su pueblo.
In the years that followed, 15,000 people were executed and 30,000 disappeared. 250 concentration camps were set up throughout Argentina, where so-called terrorists were routinely and systematically tortured while being interrogated. A mere wall separated detainees who were blindfolded and tortured from the seemingly normal life of passers-by. Thousands of people accused of terrorism were illegally detained, tortured and killed within these walls. The Argentine armed forces were trained in torture from the 1960s. These torture training sessions were sometimes photographed by those taking part in them. 33 years after the fall of the military regime, only one torturer is in jail.
"30 years after the end of the Argentinian Dirty War, the children of the disappeared were still searching.
La Guardia de Infantería.
30,000 people disappeared in the Dirty War. Among them were 500 pregnant women who gave birth in captivity, then were killed. Their babies are now 30 and struggling to discover who they are.
Ernesto Simon, who is a historian at New York University, former reporter for the Argentine newspaper, both the same as Horacio's newspaper, Página 12, and Clarín, where he reported on politics and human rights, as well as, well, Father Bergoglio, now Pope Francis.
For more on the new Pope, we turn now to one of Argentina's leading investigative journalists, Horacio Verbitsky, who has written extensively about the career of Cardinal Bergoglio and his actions during the military dictatorship that ruled Argentina from 1976 to 1983. During that time, up to 30,000 people were kidnapped and killed. A 2005 lawsuit accused Jorge Bergoglio of being connected to the 1976 kidnappings of two Jesuit priests, Orlando Llorio and Francisco Jalix. The lawsuit was filed after the publication of Verbitsky's book, The Silence from Paul VI to Bergoglio, The Secret Relations Between the Church and the ESMA. ESMA refers to the former Navy school that was turned into a detention center where people were tortured by the military dictatorship. The new Pope has denied the charges. He twice invoked his right under Argentine law to refuse to appear in open court to testify about the allegations. When he eventually did testify in 2010, human rights activists characterized his answers as evasive. In the case of Bergoglio, there's also the issue, as you have documented, and several other journalists in Argentina, of his particular role or accusations about his involvement in the dirty wars in Argentina. Could you talk about that and some of the things that, because you've been a leading investigative reporter uncovering the relations between the church and the government in terms of the dirty wars?
Of course. He was accused by two Jesuit priests of having surrendered them to the military. They were a group of Jesuits that were under Bergoglio direction. He was the provincial superior of the order in Argentina. 36 years he was provincial. During a period of great political activity in the Jesus Company, he stimulated the social work of the Jesuits, but when the military coup overthrew the Isabel Perón government, he was in touch with the military that ousted this government and asked the Jesuits to stop their social work. And when they refused to do it, he he stopped protecting them, and he let the military know that they were not more inside the protection of the Jesus Company, and they were kidnapped. The president founding of CELS, Center for Legal and Social Studies, Emilio Mignone, said that Bergoglio was accomplice of the military. This priest has links with subversion. That was the name that the military gave to all the people involved in opposition to the government, political or armed opposition to the military, and that he was jailed in the mechanic school of the Navy, and saying that this information was provided to the officer by Father Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Provincial Superior of the Jesuit Company. This means, to my understanding, a double standard. He asked the passport given to the priest in a formal note to his signature, but under the table he said the opposite and repeated the accusations that produced the kidnapping of the priest. After his releasing, went to Rome.
How were they found?
Sorry?
How were they found? In what condition were they? What had happened to them?
Well, he was released, both of them were released, dragged, confused, transported by helicopter to in the outskirts of Buenos Aires, were abandoned as left by a drag in very bad condition. They were tortured, they were interrogated. One of the interrogators had extraordinary knowings about theological questions that induced one of them, Orlando Llorio, to think that the own Provincial Bergoglio has been involved in this interrogatory.
He said that Bergoglio himself had been part of his own interrogation, this Jesuit priest?
He told me that he had the impression that the own Provincial Bergoglio was present during the interrogatory, in which one of the interrogators had extraordinary knowledge of theological questions. And Orlando Llorio denounced Bergoglio. I received his testimony when Bergoglio was elected to the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And Bergoglio, I interviewed Bergoglio also, and he denied the charges, and he told me that he had defended them. Orlando Llorio got me in touch with Francisco Jalix, that was living in Germany. I talked with him, and he confirmed the story that he was during a lot of years very resented against Bergoglio, but that he had decided to forget and forget.
Horacio Verbitsky, I'd like to ask you about another priest who was involved in the dirty wars, Christian von Wernick, who was a former chaplain of the police department in Argentina, and also later was convicted of being involved.
He was convicted. He's in jail, in a common jail. But the Argentine Church, during the tenure of Bergoglio, hasn't punished him in canonical terms. He was convicted by the human justice, but by the church standards, he is always a priest. And this tell something about Bergoglio and the Argentine Church also.
And von Wernicke was involved in murders, tortures, and kidnappings. Could you detail some of the crimes that he was convicted of committing?
Bergoglio involved in the crimes of von Berni?
No, von Wernicke, I said.
Well, von Berni was active part in torture and killings, and he was convicted not as an accomplice, but as a participant in the crimes. He was present during the torture sessions from Berni. And there is not just one chaplain. There are some others that are under trial in this moment. Chaplain Regueiro is under house arrest because he's an older man. Chaplain Citelli in Santa Fe province for being present during torture sessions. So there are a lot of them that were part of the dirty war.
I wanted to read, Horacio, a part of the State Department cable released by WikiLeaks that references, the Roman Catholic priest Christian von Wernicke, who you were just talking about, convicted in 2007 of being an accomplice in several cases of murder, torture, and illegal imprisonment in Argentina during the military dictatorship. It notes the conviction came, quote, at a time when some observers consider Roman Catholic Primate Cardinal Bergoglio to be a leader of the opposition to the Kirchner administration because of his comments about social issues. The von Wernicke case could also have the effect, some believe, of undermining the church's and by extension Cardinal Bergoglio's moral authority or capacity to comment on political, social, or economic questions, unquote. That was a State Department cable that was released by WikiLeaks. Horacio, could you respond?
We can go as Jack the Stripper by parts. First of all, the State Department considered that Bergoglio was the chief of the opposition to the Kirchner government, and I agree with this statement.
Bergoglio from Argentina. Cardinal Bergoglio, newly elected Pope, leader of the Roman Catholic Church. I wanted to bring in Father Matt Malone, who is in Rome now, and I'd like to get your reaction, Father Malone, to the announcement of the new Pope. And I would like to, we'll get to Father Malone in just a moment, but Father Guthrie, your reaction.
I am here.
Your reaction. Cardinal Bergoglio been elevated to the pontificate.
Well, this was not one of the names that was listed as if it was going to be an early election. I think I'm a surprise, I think, yes.
Jesuit, and I must tell you, I never expected in a million years that a Jesuit would step out as Pope.
What does that say to the larger picture, to the direction of the Catholic Church? some of the background. He was born in 1936, ordained as a priest for the Jesuit community, as you had pointed out, Father, in 1969, and that in of itself is a surprise. Father Malone, if you could, speak to the fact that a Jesuit has now been elevated to the pontificate.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing. He is the first Jesuit in the history of the Roman Catholic Church to be elected Pope. And without getting into the history of the Jesuits formed in the 16th century, we've had a stormy relationship with the Church in some centuries, and it's really an extraordinary thing.
Insofar as there has been a tension between some aspects of the Vatican and the Jesuits, and I think having a Jesuit as Pope, and in view of the fact that the Jesuits have been so worldwide in their activity, in their missionary activity, and their teaching in the Church, so that I think it would be interpreted as a sign of, rather than making a selection for someone who's closer to the Opus Dei or some much more conservative movement.
Now joining us to discuss the significance of the choice of this Pope is Matthew Fox. Matthew's written 30 books on spirituality and culture, including The Pope's War. And he was once a Catholic priest, and he is now an Episcopal priest and educator. Thanks very much for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you, Bob. It's sentimentalized by the media, and there's very little critical thinking, and that's one reason I'm glad to be with you, and we can talk about the deeper meanings. Of course, the financial situation in the Vatican is quite scandalous at this time. It needs cleaning up almost as much as the issues of pedophilia and cover-up of pedophilia, and almost as much as the issue of the Inquisition. Because all those three things, and I write about this in my book on the Pope's War, the Inquisition has been brought back in the last 42 years with the last two popes. The Inquisition has been brought back. The Inquisition has been brought back. The Inquisition has been brought back. The financial situation is really scandalous. Just a year or so ago, the Italian government forbade Vatican credit cards to be cashed any place because there was a whole question of money laundering and all this. And this has been going on for a long time with the Vatican, the lack of transparency about finance. So, and then you have to understand that there's a real link in politics with the Vatican. I point out, for example, under Reagan, the CIA linked up with Pope John Paul II, and they attacked together. They attacked liberation theology-based communities in Latin America, and it really destroyed that whole movement as it was anyway, and replaced it with Opus Dei. Liberation, all of which are extreme right-wing groups that feed, right-wing values, if you will, attitudes of power over, of domination, of patriarchy, and even of fascism, Over 105 theologians, I was just one of them, have been silenced or expelled or harassed, hounded, and in the last 42 years under Pope John Paul II and Benedict, and Benedict, when he was head of the Inquisition, they changed the name. It's called the Sacred Doctrine of Faith, but it used to be called the Inquisition. And he led the charge against all of us theologians. And I missed the 105. By the way, there's several good Canadians. And that one of them dropped dead. He died of a heart attack when he was packing his bags for the 6th time to go to Rome to defend his theology. Even though the Second Vatican Council said that theologians were free to think, and there was such a thing as freedom of conscience for everyone. You see, that's what's really happened in the last 42 years, is that I think we've had 2 schismatic popes, because the popes and their curia have taken the real teachings of Vatican II, which were about Reformation in the Church and new thinking and so forth, and linking to the gospel values of social justice. They've taken that and stuffed it. And that's what the silencing of 105 theologians means. So there's no question the Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. His actions were not that courageous under the military dictatorship of that Argentina went through in 1983 and so forth. And he's received a lot of criticism for that. Also, he has not backed liberation theology in base communities. He belongs to this group called Communion Liberation, which is a very right-wing group in Italy. It's prepared to Opus Dei. They call it the Italian Opus Dei. And it claims to be lay-based, just like Opus Dei claims, but in fact it's run by clerics. And
just let me jump in for people that don't know. I'm going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, because I certainly have no expertise in this, but Opus Dei represents the far right of the Catholic Church in alliance with the far right of various ruling elites in different countries, and it's a kind of secret conspiratorial and usually up to rather dark and nefarious things.
Well, that's true. I have a whole chapter on them in my book on the Pope's War, and it's scary because they are so prominent in the Catholic Church today. They're appointing Opus Dei cardinals and bishops all over South America, and now in North America as well. And Escriva, who was a fascist Spanish priest who started Opus Dei, they rushed him into canonization faster than any saint in history, and they ignored all the people who were close to him who saw his dark and shadow side, and his sexism, the fact that he praised Hitler. Let me say that again, he praised Hitler, and they tell us he's in heaven. I don't know what that means. But Opus Dei needs to be watched, and they're everywhere. They're very strong in the American media. They're very strong. They were very strong in the CIA and the FBI. The biggest spy in American history, who gave away more secrets than anyone, got more of our spies murdered than anyone else, is now in jail, I think for life, because he ran free in the FBI for 20 years and giving away all these secrets. Went to mass every day of the week, but meanwhile he was very treasonous. So Opus Dei is scary.
And you're saying Pope Francis is a member of something like Opus Dei. You're saying Pope Francis
he wasn't a member of Opus Dei.
No, something like it. You're saying
he was close to Communion Liberation. And they are another version that's close to Opus Dei. Opus Dei began in Spain. Communion Liberation is a more recent group. They began in Italy, and they are less secretive than Opus Dei. That's one reason we know he was part of it. I don't want to lock it down just to community liberation, but it is part of his history. I think the thing to watch is to see who he appoints as Secretary of State. The previous two Secretary of States are very shadowy people, and I can tell you some stories about them if you want to know. He's not been friendly. This is why community liberation is his path. There's a sentimental veneer to a lot of what the media is into today. And maybe they'll calm down. But remember what Carl Jung says, behind sentimentalism there lies violence. And so the sweetness is not enough. We have to see the actions and the real philosophy behind any movement and any individual that represents a movement. And not project too much onto any human being. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. The corruption the Vatican is in at this time in history is unparalleled unless you go back to the Borgias of the 16th century. The corruption the Vatican is in at this time in history is unparalleled unless you go back to the Borgias of the 16th century. The corruption the Vatican is in at this time in history is unparalleled unless you go back to the Borgias of the 16th century.
Are the IRS, FBI, U.S. Department of Labor, the Mafia, and labor unions part of the Vatican? Is the Pope the superboss of all government agencies, as well as the Vatican? The Pope's Secrets by Tony Alamo. This literature was written in 1983. The Vatican is posing as Snow White, but the Bible says that she's a prostitute, the great whore, a cult, Revelation 19:2. She uses government agency branches in every country, including the United States, as her vicious little dwarfs. The more power and control she gets in government, the more she will fade into the background in her Snow White disguise, so that government will be used and blamed for all her evil deeds. reason: to enforce laws that harass, malign, destroy, and censor everyone.
I mean, we got a pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did. The Pachamama.
So he brought that in?
Yeah, into the Vatican. Then the hierarchy even worshipped it. They had a ceremony around it outside.
What?
So, well, that constitutes apostasy.
Yeah.
That's an apostasy move, right?
Worshipping false gods.
Yeah. That's number one on the Mosaic hit list. So it's an inside job.
So you remember not that long ago, we had this clip of Mel Gibson on Joe Rogan, and it was kind of a long clip. So I kind of picked some parts out of there as talking points about Passion of the Christ and Mel Gibson talking about Jesus, going to hell to preach to the people. Well, watch the episode.
Yeah,
we get into all that.
It kind of blew up on our channel, and the comment section blew up as well.
So. And just for clarification, that wasn't we don't do this to put people in a bad light. We're not like trying to throw dirt on Mel Gibson or anything like that. And just kind of discussing, he's making this film, this is what's in it, and talk about the theology of that. So anyway, I want to show you another clip from here because it's talking about something more specifically Catholic. So have you heard of Vatican II? Okay, so he's going to hit on Vatican II and some issues around that. So here we go.
And when you asked what's the difference between pre-Vatican II, so Vatican II happened, and of course they took the church and they reformed it, and they changed things in it, and it didn't necessarily agree with everything that went before it. And up to that point, yeah, you could find it agreed with itself, but all of a sudden, you got something else, to the point where now, I mean, we got a pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did. The Pachamama. He brought the South American, and he got.
I don't know what that is.
It's kind of like a South American god, Pachamama.
Why would he do that?
Good question. But he did.
Did he have an explanation for why he did it?
Yeah, it's kind of a weasel-worded thing of like, all religions are just as good as one another. But, if that's his contention...
He shouldn't be the Pope.
No.
How can you be the Pope if you say all religions are just as good?
Yeah, we all worship, So, yeah, there's the Pachamama. There you go.
So he brought that in?
Yeah, into the Vatican. Then the hierarchy even worshipped it. They had a ceremony around it outside.
What?
So, well, that constitutes apostasy.
Yeah.
That's an apostasy move, all right?
Worshipping false gods.
Yeah. That's number one on the Mosaic hit list. You know? Moses goes up on the mountain, he comes back down, people are worshiping a golden calf.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah.
So you can't do that. And for me, that's a departure from... that's called apostasy.
Right.
That's a falling away from it. And the very nature of apostasy means that you have to be part of it to fall away from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an inside job.
Wow.
That was a pretty heavy statement.
Wow, inside job?
It's very revealing.
I would agree with him.
I would too.
Yeah, he's almost, you think it almost sounds like he's echoing 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Right?
Right? Because, it alludes to the Antichrist power being a part of the faith, and it's like, used to walk with us and it's come out. And, anyway, that was kind of some of my takeaway. So, yeah. Joe Rogan. Do you know anything about Joe Rogan?
I mean, he's one of the most popular YouTubers outside of like him being a conservative minded person. He does portray that he's really genuinely searching for truth.
It appears that way, and he used to be kind of a atheist, I guess, from what I'm reading, and he's become a lot more vocal about faith and says the world needs Jesus and these kind of things. Again, not to be critical of Mel Gibson, but that was kind of my first thought too, is you're picking on this one thing, but then there's some other things in Catholicism that are that way too.
Probably might not even know about,
Maybe not. I don't know. He seems like he's able to speak to the issues.
But I think it's neat to see that something's irking him about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that he's willing to actually address that, and maybe hopefully
it's a good thing.
Some of those things will come more readily to him or something.
Yeah. This is what came to my mind. Would you mind reading it, James?
You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments.
Amen.
Yeah, and so, when he was mentioning that, I'm thinking, well, but in the Catholic 10 Commandments, like, that is not there.
They've taken it out.
And that doesn't seem to be an issue. Anyway, but yeah, again, he could be waking up, he could be having this whole religious epiphany, I don't know. But that's where my mind went, is like, we can pick on one thing, but there's all kinds of things to pick on. But fascinatingly, he talked about Vatican II. Do you know much about Vatican II?
So the Vatican basically is rebranding, I guess.
Yeah, you can sort of think of it that way.
Kind of coming as like, okay, maybe we did some really bad stuff in the back. So it's a real big dismissal of, we're not like that anymore. We're going to be like this.
My understanding is it's a very ecumenical movement. It's trying to bring all of the other faiths in, which is interesting. That Mel Gibson was referencing that God, because recently the Pope was also seen with the witch's stang.
That was nuts. That was actually nuts. It was, you guys brought that up on a show, or I remember when it came out.
It was the Hallow app episode.
That's right. That was wild.
But that's my understanding of it. It was an ecumenical movement. But my understanding is also that they are trying to publicly look like they've changed, but they actually haven't changed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. Anything that you want to throw in there?
Well, it's interesting, from Bible, we know that God does not change. His law is reflective of his character, and he says, I change not. But also, Revelation reveals the beast power, first beast of Revelation 13, as having leopard-like spots. So it's interesting that the beast, can a leopard change its spots? If we're talking about a change, fundamentally, if this power is the leopard, it's not going to change, really. It's just going to veil it in a different way, but it's not changing.
Yeah, Vatican II happened after Pope John the 23rd was elected, which is a contested papal election. Even Mel Gibson, in another part of that interview, brings this up because there was black smoke, which was...
it's supposed to be white.
There was the white smoke, which says, okay, we have a pope. And then there was black smoke, I guess, within a short period of time. I don't know. Remember if it's like half an hour later or something. And it was like, okay, well, there's whoever was selected got deselected or something like that. So he's kind of talking about this whole thing, like what's going on here? Like, is the real pope really this guy, or is it supposed to be somebody else? And there's a movement in Catholicism that says the papacy's seat is vacant and has been since that time. They don't believe that a real pope has been on the throne.
I would like to have a camera in that room.
Yeah,
why can't we see? Why can't we see them picking one? What are they doing in that room that they don't want to show anybody?
Yeah.
I like what you said there. I mean, unless it's the Black Pope. That has, I mean, I don't know. I see a pope out there. I see Pope Francis. It seems to me like there is a pope, but we know that the Black Pope really is in power, which is a Jesuit pope as well, which is a secret society that's run by the Vatican. Got a whole video on that if you want to watch that. But he's actually in power and he is the general. The Pope Francis is just the face.
Yeah. Anyway, getting off a little bit of track, but Vatican II happened after his election. So somewhere in like the early 60s through about 1965, they met several times. Out of that was produced like 16 documents and 4 major themes and things like this. But Huffington Post ran an article that said Vatican II changed the Catholic Church and the world. So here is what they said. Scotty, you want to read that?
The shift included the Catholic Church's attitude toward other religions. Before Vatican II, Catholics weren't supposed to visit other denominations' houses of worship. The Catholics looked down on the other religions and thought of them as condemned to hell. But one document from the council acknowledged these desperate faiths have a common belief in God, said Ryan, who described it as nothing less than a revolutionary approach.
It's kind of alluding to what Mel Gibson had. He's like, this is apostasy. Here we are, But part of Vatican II was this real ecumenical push, like you alluded to. And some of that came when you think about historically what's going on in the early 60s, what's happening here in the States. A lot of like revolutionary type stuff, right? It's the civil rights movement. It's counterculture. It's you have free love and all this kind of stuff is flowing into society. One of the things that Catholicism came under heavy scrutiny for was anti-Semitism. And so they're trying to find a way to be like, we don't want to appear to be anti-Semitic. And you have the whole Jewish-Palestinian conflict that's, also playing into this. And then Muslims, and they're like, okay, how do we define our relation to other belief systems? And obviously they don't want to look like the bad guy.
Well, I find it interesting that you bring up this ecumenical aspect because the Catholic Church was once the world church. Like everywhere. Like you were only Catholic. There were no other denominations. That is until the Reformation happened, where Protestants like Martin Luther and Zwingli, out of which many different denominations came, those people and many other people start standing up and start saying, you know what, we don't actually think that some of the stuff you teach is biblical. We actually think there's a lot of paganism mixed with Christianity, and we want the Bible and the Bible alone, etc. But then the whole purpose of the Catholic Church was like, no, you need to come back to us. We're the mother church, right? And that's when they also instituted the Jesuits, which again, like I said, is a secret society, that the sole purpose was to creep into other churches and act like they're Protestants to plant seeds to bring you back. And now you're seeing it again. It's the ecumenical movement of like, well, how can we bring people back into the Catholic Church? Or let's just befriend everybody and hang out with everybody.
Exactly. And if the power in the Bible is being identified as Babylon, and Babylon is this conglomeration of all religions and mixtures of these different ideas, then it makes sense that they would take a more open approach. And then essentially everybody's Catholic. Doesn't matter what you are. Anyway, I want to deviate from this a little bit and talk about this document, because part of Vatican II was this declaration on religious freedom. Okay. So I read this whole thing yesterday. Took a little while to get through it. And when you read this, there's very little in here that you would find yourself disagreeing with. It reads a lot more like the United States Constitution when it comes to religious liberty. So you're like scratching their head. There is one phrase, James, do you remember what it was? It's like, when it's talking about religious liberty, it's like to due limits or something like that.
Yes, they include a statement that sounds like it's pro-religious liberty, but then they add the qualifying phrase within due limits.
Yeah, within due limits.
So wait, unpack that a little bit. What does that mean?
Well, I guess before we unpack that, the question is, who defines the limits?
So the statement reads, this freedom means that all men are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or of social groups or of any human power in such wise that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits.
So as long as you're within our boundaries, the second you step out of our boundaries, you can no longer think like that.
Exactly. So you read this whole thing and it sounds very, very, very pro-religious liberty. Very pro-religious liberty. But when I was digging in around, I'm like, obviously there's controversy around this thing. So what is the problem? What do people have an issue with? Go to the National Catholic Register, okay, which is a Catholic, very Catholic source. I think they're a paper. Are they a paper?
Probably like a publication.
Some kind of publication. It says in this article, sets standard for defending religious freedom. So when we go here, what do we read? And Nick, would you mind reading that?
Dignitatis Humanae teaches that no person should be coerced by any human agent in matters religious. Religious freedom, in short, constitutes an immunity from coercion in civil society. Thomas Farr, the director of the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit university, told the register. However, this does not mean that the church is indifferent to the way a person exercises his freedom. To the contrary, Dignitatis Humanae does not change the church's teaching on who she is, the church left by Jesus for all mankind, and what is required of us.
One of the interesting things that comes out of this is the line that they draw. They're helping interpret, what does this thing mean when the church is talking about religious freedom? And they referred to this Georgetown. James sent me an article from a guy who wrote up on this at Georgetown. And it's very interesting. There was kind of like 3 different positions when it came to religious freedom. But in that article, it basically said that error has no freedom. So now you're getting into the realm of, well, what is the truth and who's defining the truth? And essentially, they're the ones that are defining the truth. And when they're talking about religious freedom, what they're trying to do is set themselves up apart from the state and say, we are as a church declaring ourselves that we need to be free from hindrances and people need to be free from hindrances of the state. The state should protect religion, but in matters of religion, we're the sole authority. So they're
and not the Bible,
putting themselves above. So here's another interpretation on this document, the RFI blog, Religious Freedom Institute, I think it was, talking about this as well. It says the 19th century popes called for the state to coerce, to issue legal directives backed up by threats of punishment in support of religious truth and against religious error, and to enforce the laws of the church. This is kind of the picture that most everybody remembers of Catholicism, especially for Inquisition and things like that. So like when you think of religious persecution and religious intolerance, kind of the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages comes to mind, right? It goes on, it says, but in 1965 in Dignitatis Humanae, Vatican II taught something that appears quite opposite. When you read it, I'm telling you, it looks like total religious freedom. That we have a right not to be coerced in our religious activities by the state, except where the state needs to protect just public order, because the state lacks the authority to coerce religiously. Okay, we go on. One of the 2 powers has for its proximate and chief object the well-being of this mortal life. The other, the everlasting joys of heaven. Whatever, therefore, in things human is of a sacred character, whatever brings either of its own nature or by reason of the end to which it is referred, to the salvation of souls or to the worship of God, falls wholly within the power of the church and is wholly subject to her judgment.
Not God's, the church.
So there's something further, though, in the same document. This is Immortali Dei from Pope Leo VIII on November 1st, 1885, where they go on to state that the unrestrained freedom of thinking and of openly making known one's thoughts is not inherent in the rights of citizens and is by no means worthy of favor and support.
So even your thoughts can get you in trouble.
Freedom of thinking, unrestrained, is not to be supported.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of it's really, when you look at it, nothing's really changed. They've just changed the way it's massaged, more or less. So the documents that are out there basically say you should be free to seek and worship God as you see fit and your family. But really, there's only one choice, and that choice is the Catholic Church, and we're going to define what truth is for you.
So, same restaurant, just different logo.
I mean, really. And you kind of wrap this thing up and it says, this is kind of the conclusion of this whole document. So this Dignitatis Humanae, strict teaching about the authority of the state, not the church. And far from contradicting 19th century papal teaching, the declaration recognizes and makes explicit what Leo XIII's 2-power theory implies for the moral rights of the individual against the state in matters of religion once the state has become secular.
Wow.
So that was, that was really what that whole thing is about. So on the outside, And I can imagine how confusing this would be. And this is why, we're not coming down on people like Mel Gibson. I kind of wonder, even in the church itself, he's looking at it like, well, this whole thing changed and it's different. I wonder how many Catholics really do understand that a lot of this isn't just that different. Like, it's been reworded and repackaged in a way that looks really nice and pleasing. But you look at even their own people that are interpreting some of this stuff, or religious institutes, and they're saying nothing's really changed. It's still the same. It's still that has the ability to be that religious persecuting power.
Yeah. The church is defining the morality. I mean, it's interesting that it wasn't like based on the Bible, like on what the scriptures say.
Yeah, I like what John 8:36 says. If the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. Right? And that doesn't tie you to a church or an institution or an organization. It's tied to Jesus. Your freedom is found in Christ alone.
In some ways, though, the devil has to unify his forces against the remnant at the end of time. So he has to support some kind of agreement between them, or means of putting down the peace. And one of the ways that I think Dignitatis Humanae is actually reflected in Catholic art and doctrine and pushes is actually a model by Vincenzo Pandolfi, and we talked about this before on the Jesuit episode, where you've got this one central church and all these other denominations are encircling around it. And it's almost like what Revelation describes, where you've got this mother church and you've got all these daughters. So long as you agree with that mother church and accept her authority in spiritual matters, you have freedom to, certain freedom to say what you want. But the minute that you step outside of that, then you're deemed a heretic.
And you see this too with all the presidents and world leaders that come and show up to the Pope. I mean, we mentioned this before off camera that at one point Trump made some remark about the Pope. He was joking about the Pope or something. But lo and behold, when he gets voted in, he's standing there and he's making a visit. I mean, they're all doing it. And they're not all doing it to some other Christian leader. It's just the Pope.
Right. It's wild when you see those videos of all these like famous world leaders and stuff like that all coming and visiting him.
They recognize him as a man of authority and of power. But it's like, but he's a religious person. Why is he showing up at all your political events and all your political meetings with all of the world leaders? What does he have to do with that? What does he know about the economy?
I like how Christ, all through the Bible, is the source of religious liberty. You look at the Garden of Eden, he offered them a choice. It wasn't coercion. It wasn't anything like that. It was like, look, you can choose. And he has allowed humanity continue to choose. It doesn't mean that your choices won't have consequences. They'll have consequences. But Christ, all throughout the human history, has allowed us to choose. And that's why I believe that James refers to God's law as the law of liberty. We can choose. It doesn't mean that we're always going to make the right choice, but Christ has instituted religious freedom for every person to say, you know what? The choice is up to you. You decide.
Not only that, but he's also said that vengeance is mine, I will repay.
That's right.
So when there's people who diverge from truth, it doesn't require the state to come along and say, well, we're going to persecute these heretics. God is the one that will step in and correct matters.
He can actually take care of it. He knows what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. We hope that you will appreciate this. And check it out some more. I mean, we didn't do anything exhaustive on Vatican II. We may do something in the future with James and look into that a little more. But I hope that you appreciate your religious freedom, no matter what walk of life you're coming from. And so make sure you give this video a thumbs up, a like, share it with somebody who may need to see it. And we hope to see you next time in another episode of LED Live. Take care.